Live, this is the Crew Lounge, where knowledgeable people come to discuss railroading and model railroading topics. Pull up a chair and let's get started.
All right, and hope you got your chair pulled up. Hope you got your coffee poured. Got all your drinks ready to go. I'm John, your host. This is the TSG Live Crew Lounge. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking to some younger people in the hobby. And when I say younger people, well, usually depending which hobby you're talking about. If we're talking about model railroading, younger people is usually anybody under about 70. I think I'd qualify for that. But we're talking about model railroading, railfanning, and railroading, historical preservation, all that stuff. Probably the same demographic, but let's bring everybody in. I want to introduce you to Paul next to me and Trevor. And we have Clint down here, known as the Steam King. And then a lot of people know Drew. Drew has a channel, Nordell Model Railroad Club, if I remember right. And then Schon Norris is the last person down on the bottom right. Why don't we go around the table here, and each of you guys can say something about yourself. I would suggest maybe to start with your age and what your involvement in the hobby, the overall hobby, whether it be model, live, whatever, what your involvement is. Maybe we can start with our discussion. Well, Paul, why don't you go first, since you're kind of the next person on the team as the reading goes.
I'm Paul Nolan. I'm 21 years old. I just turned 21. And
you're buying the beer next time.
I know. That's right. And my involvement in the hobby is I've been doing it for as long as I could walk, probably. The trains used to pass by my house every day, so I couldn't avoid the bug. And I'm involved in modeling HO scale Southern Pacific in 1955. I'm doing G scale at the Fern Creek and Western Garden Railroad in the 1920s, and also doing video for Tree Frog Flag Productions.
Tree Frog Flag Production.
We're going to rebrand to make it easier.
TFF maybe? I don't know. What about you, Trevor?
We've been considering.
Right. What about you? TFF Multimedia. What about you, Trevor? Introduce yourself.
You'd be able to sue us for that, possibly, John.
Oh, I probably not. Or if I could, I probably wouldn't.
Yeah,
wouldn't do that.
Anyway, I'm Trevor Park, and Paul and I are best friends. We live right near each other. As the crow flies, we're like a mile away from each other right now. But I've been involved in model railroading and real railroading for quite a long time. I think I've been a model railroader like Paul since we could walk. I mean, Paul grew up next door to my aunt. That's how we met. And we used to play trains in his garage all the time as kids on his HO 4x6 layout. But like Paul, I also modeled the SP in 1955 on my home layout here. And Eric Child and I started the Fern Creek and Western Garden Railroad in 2014, which kind of branched myself out into a larger scale. By the way, Paul, F scale, not G scale. Remember?
Did I say G scale?
Oh, you said G scale. We get shot if you say
F
scale.
It's F scale.
Right, yeah.
Garden narrow gauge 3 foot.
That's right. That's right.
G scale is more searchable, so you got to.
Yeah, right. So we're going on 7 years now of the Fern Creek and Western, coming up this June, and that's been a collaborative effort of both myself, Eric, Paul, and then many of our other friends. But then, where really it all started for me was in the real railroad world. Paul and I were lucky enough to grow up Paul grew up next to the Santa Cruz branch, which was a UP branch line that ran up to a cement quarry about 30 miles up the coast at a place called Davenport that ran until about 10 years ago or so. And we also have a local tourist railroad called Roaring Camp Railroads, which really was where it started for me. I think my first birthday party was at Roaring Camp, and I started hanging out there as a kid, and the crew took notice to that and made sure to put me up in the engine and show me how things worked. And when I turned 16, I hired on there, became a conductor when I turned 18, and then was promoted to locomotive fireman on the steam locomotives. And that is where my position lies today. I'm a full-time locomotive fireman on 3-foot narrow gauge geared engines, which is not something that people my age do too often, but it's a pretty unique hobby that has turned into somewhat of a career for me as well.
Yeah. So what about you, Clint? I'm going to be learning now because I don't know the answer to this question.
So my name's Clint Brantley, aka the Steam King on YouTube. I've been doing YouTube for about 12 years, the train channel for about 11 specifically. I think I was born with the train in my hand from the womb. I love I just love
doctor's delivering little baby Clint. Look, he has a GP40 in his hand.
One of my earliest baby pictures is me playing with the train, like 2 months old. So yeah, it's pretty early on. But I obviously I love Steam. It's probably a connection due to my grandfather. We grew up going to the train yard every weekend, but his stories about steam locomotives and us watching Trains Unlimited together growing up was probably one of the biggest impacts on me. And then when the internet came out and then everybody started producing all this content, there was so much to binge. I really gave me a lot to sink my teeth into. It grew from being able to go, having to go to the library every, Friday, Saturday with my mom, getting I Love Toy Trains or Thompson Tank Engine to now having everything at your fingertips on the computer. That was a big deal. But also, big fan of Tree Frog Flag Productions. I've been watching y'all for a long time. So I remember when I was about 15, I think I came across you guys. But anyway, that's kind of my spiel. So that's kind of how I'm into trains and what I've been doing on YouTube for a while. So
how old are you now, Clint?
Oh, I'm 26.
26. Okay, you might be the oldest. We're going to find out here pretty soon.
Right.
Okay, Drew, it's your turn.
Hey, well, I am Drew at Nordell MRRC on YouTube. I've been doing this for 7 months, and I'm surprised how far it's gone. Lately, I've been doing stuff for Model Railroad News, reviewing stuff for them. I was lucky enough to work my way up through the interview chain to have Scale Trains commission that interview, and then I got in touch with Rod Stewart, so hopefully maybe
Are you serious?
Soon.
You got in touch with him?
His management company, so we're gonna hope that goes through. So
I told you that you'd be the first one to talk to him.
Well, the way
You'll
I got
see.
to it was Comback, the people there, but I know Ken Patterson tried to do it, and I was talking to him. He said that he gave up on getting in touch, so I'm not holding my hopes too high, but it's farther than not doing anything, so we'll see where it goes.
We'll see. Okay, Sean, what about you? It's your turn.
All right. Well, I'm Sean. I'm 21. Some of you may know me as that guy who is overly obsessed with the Utah Railway. That's always kind of been a childish thing or a childish activity of mine. It started with just writing a little light rail system here in Utah to getting a model train, to writing more trains, to getting more model trains. And it was just like a staircase that was getting impressively more expensive as it went up. And it landed that all the way to a point where I got employed by a model train company, and I am now with Exact Rail and its sister company, Train Life, which is a full-service hobby store.
Right.
And with that job, it's allowed me to expand my bases a little bit, and it's brought me back to Utah-themed railways. And right now, I'm modeling Utah Railway 1978 and Utah Railway 1999, which is when I was born.
I don't remember. Drew, did you tell us how old you are?
I'm 16.
That's what I thought. Okay. So you said that you started only 7 months ago, Drew, on YouTube?
August, I think.
I would have sworn it was much earlier in the year.
I can look. I believe it was. I may have created the account sooner, but it was definitely August-ish when it started to become a bit more often.
It felt like it was earlier in the year because it seemed like the interview that we did, because I think I was the first, I guess, sort of known person on YouTube that you interviewed.
You were the only
right?
person I interviewed. The first person.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
a lot of people said no before you said yes. Well,
see,
a lot of
Rod
people didn't
Stewart-
say no. A lot of people said nothing.
Right. Then no response, right?
Yeah.
So Rod Stewart should take note.
Yeah.
You have to be
Here we
nice
go.
to the
Oh,
Yeah,
you
you
know
have to
what?
be
I
nice to the
started
guy.
it 10 months ago. Wow. But then the first
Okay,
time I
that-
showed my face with you was 8 months ago. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, 8 months or 7 months doesn't really make that much difference, but it just seemed like it was. Oh, I know what it was. Probably because you contacted me earlier than that, but we took probably 2 or 3 weeks or maybe a month before we actually did the interview.
Yeah, it was a lot of back and forth.
That's what it has to be. Mm-hmm. But I love how you really started at the bottom with me.
No, I wouldn't say that.
You got the biggest star first.
Oh yeah.
No, there were definitely some people that I reached out to and said nothing, and now I've kind of developed a relationship with them, and it's kind of awkward because I never bring up like, "Hey, I reached out to you and you didn't say anything, and maybe you should have said something." But it's just kind of always in the back of my head. I'm like,
right. And that's probably why you'll get those people to talk to you, because that is what I would say. It's like, oh, hey, where were you before anybody knew who I was?
Yeah.
Jerk, you know?
I mean, the one person who kind of stuck out was, I'm not going to say a name, but you can probably look who was in the live chat on my last Friday night show with Clint, and I reached out to them before I reached out to you, and I heard nothing.
Oh, I didn't get to watch that one, so I guess now I'm going to have to go watch it, huh? That was your whole plan. The suspense will kill people, right? Yeah. Hey, Trevor, did you mention that you're 20? Because you're 22, right?
No, I'm 21.
Oh, you're still 21? Wow, all you guys are buying beer.
Remember the Halloween? Because, we had the big Halloween birthday celebration thing. Creek and Western. That was this year.
Yeah, you're gonna be 22
going
this
to be
year.
22. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. See, that's where I get messed up, because you're gonna be 22 and Paul just turned 21. So you guys have.
We're almost exactly 6 months apart.
5
Okay.
6 months. 6.5 months exactly.
5.
Well,
five. Oh, 5.5. Well, say I need to go back to college. I guess I can't do math anymore.
Paul's better at math too, apparently.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Right. But I was going to ask you, Clint, because I know that you've been around. Are you involved with any of the live steamer stuff that goes on in Sacramento, or?
So I'm in Washington State, so no.
I thought you were, dude. I thought you were in Sacramento.
So that's what my Facebook page says. Actually, I think my Facebook page says San Diego. But no, I'm in Washington State, so there's not really a whole lot out here. In terms of Steam or anything Steam related. I mean, 44, 49 will come through my town occasionally, 700, but other than that, it's not really a whole lot. So,
yeah, I think your Facebook page says Sacramento, because I thought you were in Sacramento, and I can't imagine I just made that up.
Yeah.
So, but you model mostly in HO scale, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's your main sort of era and that kind of thing?
I just model anything that looks cool, and that's my problem. So
he models whatever comes out from BLI.
I'll model. Like I said, it just depends on what mood I'm in. I like a lot of East Coast railroads, like the NNW, the New York Central. Those are probably two of my favorites. But I have a fondness for the Santa Fe, because that's what my grandfather rode when he was a kid. He had a lot of stories about getting on the train with his grandmother, and all the experiences that they had. But particularly, I just kind of model whatever trains I kind of like. Growing up watching I Love Toy Trains, it kind of made me want everything. And so kind of the way that people model in O scale, how they kind of, it's like they just kind of handpick, a little bit of everything. That's kind of how I do it in HO. So I don't really have one railroad or even necessarily one era, but I just kind of like steam locomotives specifically. So that's what I normally stick to. But outside of that, I don't have any rules. So
that's why you're the steam king.
I guess so.
Yeah. Well, we have our first question coming up. And, sorry, I'm not trying to leave anybody else out that I didn't ask a direct question to yet. But we did get the first question from our audience come in. I think is one that we were going to get around to anyway. So anybody want to take a shot at this one? As younger members of the hobby, what's your suggestion for bringing other people your age, right? And so you want to go first, Drew, since I saw you putting your hand up.
Well, I think it's hard to get people of our age group into it. I think the big opportunities are below and above, because really I struggle to find the time for it. And I don't talk about this to my friends at track practice. I go up, I'm like, hey, look at what BLI made. I don't go up to people and say that.
You're going around school with the train catalogs.
Yeah.
Hey, you
Take
want
a
to
look
go
at
on a
this.
date with it? You're asking the girls if
Exactly.
you want to go on a date.
I think it's hard to convince people in the high school through college through 30-year-old age group because there's just not a lot of time and not a lot of interest. But I think, up until high school and then after that is the big opportunities. It's kind of just my 2 cents.
I funny story. So I went out the other night on a Friday night, and this girl that has been a friend of mine for a few years. I hadn't seen her in a while. we were at the club, and she was like, "Hey, you still into the train stuff?" And I'm like, "Wait, what?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "You putting my business out here on the street? Like, stop! Like, hold on a minute! Like, wait, what? Like, I don't remember telling you I was into trains." But then I remembered a lot of my friends that weren't into the hobby. I used to take them down to the club, my local train club. And we would run trains from time to time, like just different people that I knew over the years. I think that's one of the best ways. If you're a member of a club and you got access to the club, even on non-club days, take some of your best locomotives. One of my oldest best friends, he started getting into trains a little bit because of, just all the different trains I had, and I would go around and show him, like, "Hey, bro, like this is how you figure out like the classification of steam locomotive based on the wheels." You kind of teach them a little bit about things, and if they're good friends of yours, they'll be willing to learn. And I just think, you bring them down to a club. That's kind of how you get people our age into the hobby, and show them the technology behind it all. Show them it's not just, like the old days. You got to transform on the floor. You're watching a train go around in a circle. There's more to it than that. So,
What do you think, Sean? How would you encourage younger people, to get into?
I mean, I think that's a very loaded question, simply for the fact that it's a weird concept to try and tell people it's more than just expensive toys you're playing with, even though in literal definition, model trains are just expensive toys. It's a good way of comparing it is me and a few of my coworkers say it's like D&D, but train related. It's like you're doing a full role play scenario, and it's just an opportunity to have fun. Think of something that's a little bit larger, or in this case, smaller than yourself, to create kind of a realistic world and kind of create it to your liking. And like for my purposes, like I want to fantasize something I never saw. And then as far as the history goes, what I've convinced a few people who have actually kind of gotten into trains because of it is showing them how much trains rely to history. And going forwards being like, well, this train helped you see why this place is here. This is because a railroad built it. And slowly introducing people into the concept of trains and then building it up from there is how I've gotten a few people to actually turn on to the hobby.
So what you're doing is sort of folding in the historical aspects because, like it or not, and it doesn't matter what railroad you're talking about, I don't think, there is a very strong historic component to all of it.
Yes.
Because they were built for transporting stuff, right? So
yeah, I try and tell them it's like playing with trains isn't watching a train, like as you said earlier, like setting up a transformer, watching it spit around in the circle for 2 hours, getting sick of it, and hopping on your TV. It's more than that. It's something that can keep you entertained for hours and can encourage you. And then on top of that, there's so many different skills you can learn within the model railroading hobby. If you're an artist and you're good with painting, if you're good with electronics, if you're good with just scratch building of any sort, there's a side of the hobby that every person specializes in within model railroading.
I think it's true. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Drew said. Like really young, maybe like before 10 or so, before middle school even. That's like kind of a critical age for kids to want to get interest in the hobby. By the time they're in high school, I mean, I've shown my friends train stuff before, and they're just like, oh, that's Paul and his trains. Like I can't do much more than that. They just think I'm crazy, but they're still friends with me, I think, unless my parents pay them. But speaking of parents, though, that was a good lead-in. I think it's very up to the parents at that young age to pursue the kid's passion. Because I don't know if my parents had a choice, since the train went by every day and I went crazy every time it passed. But in a lot of other scenarios, the parents just might stop buying their kids' trains and then they just forget about it. But a lot of it is really up to the parents, because my dad, when he lived in Boston, he had a bunch of model trains and stuff. And I think that kind of, he enjoyed it as a kid and he wanted me to do that too, probably so he could play with them too. But
Well,
you know.
I mean, I think you bring up a good point, and I think that might be one of his motivate because they're still cool. And if you're going to get something for your kids, I mean, I can say this because I have kids. If you're going to get something for your kids that you're also interested in, that makes the decision a lot easier.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And
So
I also,
a lot of it's up to the parents.
Right. I also like the fact that your dad has showed up on some of our chasing trains excursions. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he loves trains.
Yeah. Other Paul.
Yeah.
What do you think, Trevor? What do you think? I mean, because you have kind of I think you have a relatable story because just getting involved at Roaring Camp was a lot of people encouraging you as a little kid. Like, how did that happen?
Well, I think that, for years I hung out at that place, right? And I would be there every single weekend watching the trains come by. And when you're on a freight railroad, right? Hundreds of crewmen go by. You have no idea who the people are in the cab. When you're at a small tourist railroad, you really start to get to know the people. It's the same, 10, 15 people who run the locomotives, firemen, conductors, the same people. And I think that one thing I will say about Roaring Camp is they have learned there has been a really long-standing tradition of apprenticeship there. And it goes back to people like, Phil and Tom, who are on your Builder's Plate program. They were young people who were hanging out there. Phil's a really good example of someone who was hanging out there as a kid. And they started putting him in the cab, showing him how things worked. And that fosters a really young interest, because I think I was probably about 10 years old the first time they put me up in the cab of one of those locomotives. And it was a big deal to be in the cab of a locomotive under steam and riding up a hill like that. And that really... it made it stick for me that I wanted to be on an engine. But on the model railroading side of things, I definitely agree with Drew and Paul on the get 'em young age, so to speak, because I think my defining moments of becoming into model railroading were when a neighbor that was down the street from me had a garden railroad. And someone at my elementary school who lived next door to him told me about this. And I was have to go see this, a railroad outside in the garden. And I went up there and he started letting me help work on his railroad. And he, pay me a little bit of money to help him pull weeds or whatever. And that got me really interested in garden railroading. But on the model railroading side, I think Paul and I have a really similar experience of Eric at the MA. The Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. Every year, Eric does our friend who we co-own the railroad with, the Garden Railroad, does a toy train show, which is going on, I think, 15 or 16 years now, where they actually let the kids run the trains. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing for certain people in this hobby to get around, is letting the kids actually be hands-on. A lot of times I've seen in this hobby are older people who have very nice models who are in the realm of, kid, don't touch that, don't get near that train, that thing's very expensive, don't touch that. And that's a real deterrent for young kids. I don't think that they quite understand that, right? So I think you have to let it be hands-on to some extent in order to get into it. What?
Or just don't show up with your expensive
Or just don't show up with your nice expensive models. But I think to Sean's point about there being many aspects to the hobby, when I introduce the hobby to friends in high school or college, I say, well, I'm a model railroader, or I work on a real railroad. And for model railroading, I would show them pictures of a layout. I wouldn't show them pictures of a train. Because as he says, there's a lot of artistic aspect to it. I think people can wrap their heads more around the building part than the running trains part, because they can really see wow, that is realistic. How did you make it look like that? I think they can wrap their heads more around the skill that's required to build models rather than just running trains. But with the real full-size stuff, I mean, I'm thankful that I have the ability to just throw someone in the cab of the locomotive whenever I want and say, here, come for a ride and see what I do. And that is a just mind-blowing experience for some people, being on a 100-year-old piece of equipment and seeing what it was really like. So I think that, as I say, hands-on to me is the key to get people into it. You're not gonna no one wants to really be a spectator. People want to have their hands in the pie.
It's mentioned. It's funny you mentioned that, or not funny. It's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the people that I met at the NMRA's, well, it was the National Train Show that immediately followed the NMRA National Convention in Salt Lake City a couple of years ago. And there was a guy at the train show who had a big Lionel setup, and he had they have like a DCC thing. It's a wireless controller. I don't remember what he called it, but
Legacy, I think is what they call it, or
Yeah.
I don't, something like that. But he had two different types. He had one that was a little more complex, and then one that was a little simpler. And the more complex one is what an adult would use if they're going to run trains on this Lionel layout. And then the simpler one, he had a few of those. And what he told me was that he just hands it to kids. Kids walk up to the table to look at the trains, and he hands the remote to them and says, here, you can drive the train. Here's how you blow the whistle. Here's how you make it go. And they do it. And they're good at it. And I asked him, aren't you afraid of one of these controllers walking off? You know, like some kid taking it? He says, it never happened. He says, because when they take ownership of that, they want to make sure that when they do leave, they give it to the next person who will be the steward for it. Basically was what he was saying, so that they will take care of it. And I think there is something about that makes it real to someone, putting the control in their hands, which is what you were alluding to earlier, Trevor, at the Museum of Art and History, which, by the way, I've covered that event with Eric a couple of times on podcasts just to show people that it was happening. They have the controller down on basically on a stand next to the floor at kid height so that the kids can do it. And there's nothing better than that. Let's see what this says. For those on the panel that went to college, did you go to one that had a model? Oh, that's an interesting question. Is there a model railroad club at the college you were going to, Trevor?
No, but that there's a local garden railroad club I got involved in.
Okay.
And that actually allowed me to meet some real interesting people in the area. Really, I mean, the club wasn't a big deal to me. Like they do a couple events. I mean, they have tons of events. They have, you know, open houses, things like that. But it allowed me to meet people in the area. And I ended up meeting this really amazing model builder named Gary Lee. He's actually one of only two people, I believe, in the garden railroad hobby who has a Master Model Railroad designation from the NMRA. The only other person is Jack Verducci, who wrote the Garden Railway Basics book, or not Garden Railway Basics, Structures in Garden Railways, which is one of the most popular books about garden railways out there. But Gary Lee builds everything, all of his buildings from scratch. Every last one on his layout is completely built out of wood from scratch. And so when I was up there with him right before COVID hit, I mean, literally right before, I had to rush to finish it as, you know, the closures were coming inbound. We built a 2-stall engine house together, which is that wooden one you saw at Fern Creek this last year. And
I think we put that on a show, didn't we?
Yeah, I think so. And so you know, he helped me build models. He has this really amazing shop. And so, you know, it's important, I think, if you're in college or going somewhere else, join the local clubs and find what's out there. And you generally meet people who are very interesting, who have cool things to show or let you help them with things. But actually, in that same subject, my real college experience of getting involved in something railroading wise was when I got up there to Oregon. It's a school in Salem, Oregon, in the Willamette Valley. When I got up there, there was a few heritage operations around. None of them really had steam other than the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad, which was about an hour and 45 minutes away. And I was like, well, I'm not going to make that drive out there all the way over the mountain to the coast. That's a long drive. No way I'm going to do that.
Yeah, right.
And my parents were driving down the coast, you know, sightseeing, touring, whatever, and they get to Rockaway Beach along a railroad track. And there, sitting on the track, is the McLeod 25, which is a 262 Prairie, which was the engine used in Stand By Me, for anyone that's seen that movie, that chases the kids off the bridge. So they go up to the locomotive, and naturally they talk to the engineer, who happened to be the general manager, or the operations manager of the railroad. And they said, well, our son's a fireman at Roaring Camp, and he just came up here to college. And they're like, oh my God, he works at Roaring Camp. Like, we'll give him a job immediately. Like, you know, and I got a call the next day, like, you want to come out here and do a qualifying run? It's all yours. And so I got out there and got put in the fireman seat on my first day there and got qualified as fireman the first day I got there. And since then, that has been my weekend getaway as I go out there and run a fire engine on the Oregon coast, which is pretty amazing. And that allowed me to get involved at the very tail end of the Skookum project and do a lot of other fun things they've done up there, which I would have never have gotten to do had I not gone to college.
You know what's funny about that story? I've never heard that story, that side of the story. I thought you found that on your own. And I remember making jokes with your parents. It's like, oh, it didn't take him long to find something steam related to go do.
No, that was it. I mean, my mom, of course, you know, she loves to talk to people, bless her heart. And she went to talk to the engineer, and
Right.
I guess Roaring Camp must have somewhat of a good reputation in tourist railroad circles. I mean, given the intensity of the railroad, they figured that running on a flat ground along the coast would be perfectly acceptable for someone that's used to firing on 10.5% grades. So
Right.
I think that ended up working out well. It's been a really nice way to escape the academic sphere and go and do something that I really enjoy. And it's kind of it's refreshing in a way, recharging for sure.
Sure, it's an escape, right?
Absolutely.
So, what about the rest of you guys? When you were in school, whether it be college or high school or whatever, did you run into places that had railroad clubs?
No,
Nothing, huh, Drew?
Absolutely not.
I did not. I have
Nope,
my
not
club I
here.
go to, but it's in no way associated with anything that I do school-wise, and it's a half an hour away from me.
Oh, it's that far. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Are there any younger people at that club? Like your age?
Not
or-
who regularly attend. I'm kind of it. There's not a lot of people who I notice on the East Coast, so much as the West Coast and the Midwest into the hobby in general.
Really?
Yeah, at least who make themselves known.
Oh, well, maybe that's a whole different thing
Yeah,
altogether.
well, one thing I notice about the East Coast is people just aren't as aware as they are, like tech savviness and stuff. Like people, even brand awareness as far as like Rapido versus MTH versus BLI, like people don't care as much. Like on the West Coast, you hear about people who are like super
No.
into Athearn or whatever. So
Drew,
much
I can tell you from personal experience, the West Coast is the same thing. It just
Really?
like
I feel
it
like there's
depends.
some people who are just not aware of it at all. Like it's
Bro,
just kind of
it
weird
depen-
sometimes.
It depends. I know exactly what you're saying because when I was a member of a club out here, people just like they're like, oh, is that like they're like I can't talk today. I'd be running a daylight, right? Like, oh, is that a Broadway limit? It's like Broadway limit doesn't even make a daylight. Like, how can you get this? Is that the Lionel? When have you seen a Lionel HO daylight smoke?
Limited? No, it's not.
It's like, dude, no, but most of the time, like those guys, they don't care because they're not a lot. I've noticed a lot of the older guys that are into the hobby, at least out here, they're not into it.
Yeah.
Like that, you know, they like nice trains, but they're not so concerned about what manufacturer makes what. So
Yeah, this is turning into our Friday show.
yeah, no, just be quiet. Stop talking.
What about you, Paul? Was there anything in high school or anything like that, or nothing? Huh?
Nothing. I was, as far as I know, I was the only person that cared about trains at my high school. Yeah.
There was more people that wanted to
besides-
train.
Like everybody just
Besides-
said, we don't bring this up to people. So I mean, there's no way
Yeah.
to know.
I did have two teachers though that liked trains.
You had more people, Paul, at your school that wanted to pull train tracks out than wanted to like like trains.
What about you, Sean? Did you chime in on this one? I don't remember.
I don't have much to add because as far as clubs are here in Utah, they're actually pretty scarce. So most of my model training experience through high school and the very, very brief time I went to college was private layouts in people's basements. And so I'd befriend these private layout owners and I'd be invited over for op sessions on occasion. And that's about to the extent of what I got. And then I would occasionally collect trains. Like I've got a shelf behind me here that has a few of my models, but I'm very minimalistic right now. So I don't have almost any club experience. There's Primo and that's it.
Okay. What about foaming? You guys all get out and railfan too, right?
Well, that's a different story.
Well, I use that as part of an all-encompassing hobby. And there's a question also at the bottom that I would like to have you guys chime in on, but I am curious about, and when I say, I know that a lot of people think of foamer as a pejorative term. I never think of it that way. If someone calls me a foamer, I'm like, yeah, what about it?
I think it's funny.
Yeah, don't think of it that way if you hear me say it, because that's never what I mean. Well, let me put it this way: if I meant to insult you, you would know. Ask Trevor and Paul. I think they would be able to attest to that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, what about foaming? Is any you guys into that? You go out and I know that I'm assuming, Sean, since you like the Utah Railway and they're still in operation, right? You must go out and foam them, right?
A little too much. My big problem is Exact Rail's offices are about a geographical half-mile from the joint Utah. So there's a train yard in Provo, Utah. It's actually 3 separate train yards, all clustered in the same area. There's 2 Union Pacific yards, and in the middle of those 2 is a joint Utah Railway and BNSF yard. And you can take a road straight down one of the Utah and through the Utah and the UP yards. And so for my lunch break, I just have to take a quick drive over, and I can get just a array of color on both the left and side of the road, the left and right side of the road. Mm-hmm. So UP will be switching something, the Utah Railway will be switching something, and it's been quite helpful doing that. And I've befriended a few of the train crew guys down there for both railroads, and so they'll occasionally tell me what's going on, and it's a great time. So foaming's at this stage of my life, it's a much bigger part than model railroading, just because it's much easier to do. Like, taking photos is free. You just have to pay for the storage and however much gas you use for the trip out there. But I find much more enjoyment, and then plus I get outside and just enjoy myself. And then I've noticed this here in Utah, but it's just easier, especially during the pandemic. It's much easier for, as a group of people, just to get out and say, hey guys, we're going to go. Earlier this year here in Utah, a bunch of us, we had a event up in Echo Canyon, which is out east of Ogden, Utah. And it was a Facebook event, and we had, I think, 25, 30 people show up. It was pretty crazy. And we just said, okay, hey guys, we're going to go chase trains. See ya. And we just all were up and down the canyon chasing trains all day. So foaming, I really enjoy right now, more so than the modeling.
Mm-hmm. Even I heard about that all the way out here in California. Yeah, I knew that was happening. That was like a month or 2 ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was back in January. And what was actually really special about that event is when we were all foaming is we've got the company that's building the new electric cars for Caltrain out there in the Bay Area.
Stadler?
Yeah, Stadler. The very first train set from Stadler just so happened to be going up Echo Canyon that day. That we all had the event by pure chance. So I'm sure the train crew got way more publicity than they bargained for signing up to work that day, because they had to deal with cameras pointing at them the entire way from Ogden all the way up to at least Evanston, Wyoming.
Very
so
cool.
it's just really fun event like that, especially in a socially distant world as it is right now. Give it a little bit more time, and that tone shift will probably change. But for now, foaming's a really big part of how I enjoy this hobby.
Yeah. I mean, because you can be outside and you can be pretty distant pretty easily, because you can get almost the same shot from 10 feet away from each other if you want to.
That's exactly what we did at some of the spots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you guys want to chime in on that same topic, I know that Trevor and Paul, I know you guys foam because we went out and did that together a number of times. What about you, Clint and Drew? Do you guys get out and do prototype railfanning much?
Go ahead, Drew.
I was about to say the same for you. I can't drive because Delaware's driver's system queue is about a year behind. So in any other reality, I would have had my full license by now. But they're still getting people through the system. So I've completed my study course, and now I need to do the driver's test, but the line is so long that it's going to be a while. So
I'm sure the pandemic didn't help with that situation.
Well, that's what caused it.
Yeah.
So I just can't get out to do it.
Right. What about you, Clint? Do you get out and foam much or no?
Not anymore. My grandfather and I used to go out every weekend, but for about 4 or 5 years ago, I started going back out to the train yards. One thing I always wanted to do was to look at the trains at night. That's something we had done from time to time. But, that wasn't very common. When I was able to drive on my own, I started going back out to the train yards, but I was told by the crews I wasn't allowed to be there anymore. They said that you're not, ever since 9/11, things have changed. We're not allowed to have anybody near the tracks, so you can't be here. So no, ever since then, I haven't actually had any desire to do much. I kind of just mainly stick to model railroading. So
yeah, they kind of shut you down, didn't they? Kind of killed the interest.
Yeah, and that it's crazy because it was the same train yard me and him used to go to every weekend, and it was just a little blow to the gut there. But there's time for it eventually somewhere down the road. But. Sure.
Well, I mean, a lot of people use the whole prototype, their interest in prototypes in their modeling too. So, it'll happen probably eventually if you come up with an era and a specific, line or area that you want to model. Right. So, but why don't we get to the question that came up a while ago? It's been sitting there, and someone is wondering if there's any family or friends that do model railroads in your circles that inspired you to do it yourself.
So for me, my grandfather never had a model train layout of his own. It's kind of weird. When I came along, when I was born, and he found out that I was into trains, he always loved trains, but he never, like my uncle, none of his kids ever really had a passion for it. So he just kind of left it alone. But when I came along, that's when he really started to get into it. But he never had like his own layout. We never really even built a layout, but we just loved trains in general. My uncle, he used to play for the Washington Redskins. He's big into model railroading. He has tons of Lionel. He's done Lionel and HO, and he's built tons of layouts and all sorts of stuff. And I talked to him from time to time. He was kind of influential, but outside of those two, there's not really anybody else in my family that's done model railroading or anything like that. I tried it. My uncle was trying to get into it with me for a while. My grandfather's son, he was trying to get into it with me, but it's been a while since we've done anything train related together. But that's about it on my end.
I find your story kind of interesting in the fact that you started out as being a prototype rail fan and then got into models later and got out of the other. Usually I think people add these fascinations to their hobby. So that's an interesting sort of departure from what I usually hear from people.
Well, with me, it was all kind of together all at one time. Like I was always into model trains, but I was also always into looking at real trains. But the model trains was, for me personally, was always bigger than watching the real trains because I always loved steam so much, and I can't go and see a steam engine every weekend. But I can definitely buy a model of one. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess if you eventually someday maybe you'll be able to move someplace that has them.
Yeah.
Like where I live, I'm fortunate in that we have a number of places you can go see steam locomotives. The first that comes to mind is Roaring Camp. Mm-hmm. They have really cool equipment there. There's
every
the
day.
Nile. Yeah, every single day, right?
Every single day.
Right? There's Niles Canyon Railway. They have steam engines up there that run almost every weekend. We have a state park within driving distance, only a few hours away, that they have a bunch of old Sierra equipment. That's Railtown 1897. And then we have a bunch of, I guess what they call grand scale or otherwise, narrow gauge equipment.
Miniature
like
railroads,
yeah, miniature railroads. We have the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad very close to where I live. There's one up in Tilden Park, which is in the East Bay. So there's a lot of options. And I could go to the Fern Creek and Western and see live steam garden scale.
I'm on the wrong side of the country, man. That's all I'm taking from this right now.
Maybe, yeah.
Move to the East Coast because everybody's like, oh, there's so many tourist railroads on the East Coast. But do you know how big the East Coast is? I mean, there's a lot, but you can't.
Aren't they all in Pennsylvania? I mean, I know there's like 2 or 3 very major ones in Pennsylvania.
Stroudsburg's 45 minutes from me. Wilmington Western's 30, but from somebody who doesn't have a way to get there. I mean,
yeah.
I biked to Wilmington Western once, and it took me 6 hours.
That's crazy.
Wow. To get a ride home. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
So it's possible.
Yeah.
I biked for 3 hours once and I was done. I never did it again. 6 hours is nuts.
Well, it's a pretty traumatic experience. So
I'm
Yeah.
so sorry.
And people say Delaware's flat. It's not. Trust me. It's not flat.
Well, I mean, it would help also if you had a suitable bike. You were probably on one of those kid bikes with the banana seat and the big handlebars, right? One speed.
No, it was a decent bike.
Oh,
Whatever
okay.
a standard bike type is. I'm not a bike
I'm just-
expert.
Right. I'm just thinking worst case scenario. You know, you're out on a tricycle or something. You know.
No, this was over COVID, that dark phase.
Yeah. So another question popped up here. Grandpa Rails. That's our friend John, Southern California, is curious to know what your favorite thing is about the hobby. Just go around the table on this one. Anyone who hasn't said something should pipe in. You've been sitting there quiet, Paul. What's your favorite thing about the hobby? And why don't I make this easier? Let's use the term the hobby to encompass all things that are railroad related. So whether it's model railroad,
makes it
prototype,
easy.
Railfanning.
Yeah, that really
whatever.
narrows it down, John.
Thanks, John.
I'm making it open ended so you guys will actually say something.
Now you made it harder of a question.
Yeah.
Okay, well then answer it any way you want to.
My favorite thing
yeah.
about garden railroading
Okay.
is completing a project and then seeing everyone struggle to figure out how to operate on it. It's sort of like having an ant farm, and you buy the ant farm and you put a bunch of ants in it and you watch where they go. You have no idea what people are going to do in the track you just built. It's I guess that could go for any railroad.
Oh, they do things that you never thought that they could do. You know,
just watching other people try to figure out, what you thought was a good idea and break it.
It sounds like something happened. I hope I wasn't involved with this.
Oh, something happens every time we have people
every
over.
time.
Every time.
Even if it's just Paul and I running, it happens.
Yeah.
Well, now I want to know what happened that made you come up with that answer, Paul. You don't have to tell me who it was, but I'm just curious. I
don't know. I mean, it's been plenty of people, like passing.
I can tell you the definitive moment for me on that one.
Yeah,
actually,
you have one?
was when we put
Lauren.
Lauren, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We put one of our
She was
conductor
watching?
trainees at rowing camp. She was a conductor trainee at the time. And during COVID, because she trained entirely during COVID, and we weren't doing, normally we do switching of some sort like every week, right? We're always moving something around. We're always switching the consists. Something's going on. Well, during COVID, for the first part of COVID, we only had one operating locomotive. So we ran with the same train set every single day, never got switched out. And so I was like, well, how do I teach her how to switch without actually doing it in real life? And so we had just completed the track arrangement at our town that's affectionately called Nolansburg, after yours truly off to the side of me here. And we were like, well, what's the best test of this? Oh, well, let's put someone who's never operated this to work on it. And so we had, I think I was running the engine, she was the conductor, and we had Charlie there helping her along. And so we made her like, okay, so what would you do now? You'd have to close the angle cock. You got, split the cars. All right, now coming in for a hook. You want to make a safety stop, this and that. And we put her through every single test of it to try to get her to learn how to switch cars.
It was pretty grueling.
It was grueling because she had never switched anything before. And I was trying to do it just like the real thing to prepare her for real switching, which most people don't get their training for real switching on a model railroad. But there was moves that I hadn't even thought about that got accomplished during that whole thing. The mistakes that were made that I didn't think could have gotten made. Like, how did that end up over there? Why?
Okay, I guess you had to be there.
You had to have been there.
What's
If
your
that
favorite?
story didn't make sense, that's
You had to be there.
you had to have been there. It was pretty funny.
What's your favorite thing about the hobby, Sean?
Well, since you made it more broad, I'm going to have to split the answer up here. So, as far as model railroading goes, probably one of my favorite things is being able to recreate something you really wish you could time travel back and see, but you just can't. So, for me, Utah Railway late 1970s is like a must. If I had a time machine, that's the very first place I would go. And since I know that will probably, fingers crossed, never happen, the best thing I can do is model it and go and to my best ability replicate something I so wish to have seen, and use photos. And in turn, when I present the model to somebody, they look at it with kind of a funny face. I can present photos and be like, well, this is an actual thing. I have fun with this. As far as second part to the question, I'll say more with the foaming, as kind of mentioned previously. I love going out and catching, like there's a lot of boring railroading as there is now. Like, I live in Union Pacific Territory, so I mean, I see the same. It feels like I see the same train almost every single day, going left, right, back, forth, whatever. But catching, what I like to see is catching the oddities in the foaming world. Just the stuff. A few friends and I, we have a joke train folder called "This Actually Happened, So Sit Down and Shut Up" folder. And it's just stuff that you wouldn't believe would happen in the modern day of railroading, capture it in real time, knowing it wouldn't happen again. So you're capturing history as it is right now, which will be very valuable in the future going forwards. So I have a lot of fun knowing I'm taking part in that, knowing that I will have captured something that is going to be rather much harder, or it's never going to be seen again.
And someone may even use your picture to do what you're doing now with the old Utah Railway. That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I never really thought about that before. That's interesting. I'm glad I asked the question more broadly, because otherwise we might not have had that bit of insight. What about you, Drew? What is your favorite thing about the hobby?
Clint passed it to me the last time he had it, so I'm going to pass it to Clint first.
He addressed you, Drew. You have to go.
Well, I know you're going to talk about model railroading, so I want to see where you take it, and then I want to. Come on.
All right, Drew. Fine.
See, it's
all right, dude. No,
it goes two ways.
You know what really happened was Drew wasn't paying attention, so he doesn't know what the question was. And then I called on him. He's like, "Huh?
Drew, I'll bail you out this one time. I got you. Okay, so
I bailed you out the last time.
All right, Drew. Anyway, so my favorite thing about the hobby is what the hobby was always intended for, which was to bring families closer together. One of the most interesting quotes I ever heard was from A.C. Gilbert, the one who was the maker of American Flyer trains. He said, "A child's education begins with their toys." Right. I think that in the early stages of model railroading, and I think this has been kind of lost in the hobby to a certain degree, but what was always amazing about this hobby, and compared to a lot of others, is how it brought families together. But even outside of that, even in my own personal life, outside of my grandfather and I being able to share in the hobby, or me and my cousins being able to share in the hobby growing up, just my friends that I've had over the years, just bringing them down to the train club, and just not even necessarily just running trains, but the train club is always just a good place to talk. If somebody was going through something difficult in their life, if somebody had something on their mind, hey, let's go down to the train club. Let's talk. And you spend 6 hours down there talking about life. And maybe I'll be weathering a boxcar, maybe I'll be doing some scenery or something, but we'll be having a deep conversation about something. But that's kind of been the purpose of model railroading specifically ever since its inception, is just bringing people together. And that's personally my favorite aspect of the hobby, just the people you meet, the relationships you build, and the time you get to spend with people, and the relationships that just come from that. So,
yeah, and I think that bridges the hobby as a whole, because that happens with model railroading. That also happens with railfanning. One of the things I often will say, and I've said it many times on the channel here, which is when we go out chasing trains, it's not about the trains. It's never about the trains. Yeah, we have fun, and if we see a train that's cool, that's a bonus, but it's really about being out there with your friends and having a good time with your friends. So I can relate to that.
Absolutely.
So what were you going to say before that, Drew, when you didn't know what the question was?
Thanks for bailing me out, Clint.
Gotcha, bro.
So I agree. It's the people, really, but around me, I don't really have people my age who are into this. I mean, there's one or two at the club. One of them's gone off to college. The other, I haven't seen them in a long time. So it's really just kind of me in person. But I have a lot of, people into it who aren't my age, who are older, that I still, get along very well with, and they've helped me a lot. But it's the people who I guess is the best part. Running trains is nice too. But I guess on the flip side of that, I feel like consumerism is kind of taking this hobby to another route. I mean, because you think about it, people are modeling, like the three people here, here, and here. I don't know if it's the same on your side, if that what I just did made no sense. But they're all prototype modelers trying to, model a prototype. But I feel like consumerism, in a way, it's good and it's bad. So I don't know if that made sense in my drawing, but I feel like that's kind of something every time I think about the hobby. And on one hand, it's bringing in these different aspects of the hobby, like you could model this, you could model this, but on the other side, it's kind of moving away from you're modeling something to you are, railroad modeler versus model railroader. I feel like it's kind of widening the gap.
Do you mean that you think that the companies that are making models now are making more ready to run stuff and not as much kit type stuff that you actually have to build and have skill with modeling to make? Is that what you mean?
I don't know. I don't know. I said no. So I feel like consumerism, as in buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this, where it's not as much focus on scratch building and creating something that's uniquely yours. So I guess, kit bashing is kind of becoming a lost art. And I say this talking about the young generation in the hobby, because we were grown up buying ready to run stuff. Whereas, some of the older generations, they're all into kit bashing and scratch building. So I feel like it's going the direction of becoming a lost art. And that's kind of what I appreciate about the hobby, that uniquely yours, scratch built, kit bash kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think there has been a shift, but I don't think that by any means scratch building is a dead art. I mean, look, Trevor has this scratch built engine house that I saw it. I think we showed pictures of it on was it the Steam test that we did, Trevor, where you sent me those pictures and I put them into the program, and it's a really nice.
It was the walk around the revamped railroad that it came up in, or even the caboose I did. That was started as a ready to run model, and as a matter of fact, if you want to get on the subject of how to be a modeler as a young person, I built the caboose almost entirely in my dorm room at college. And it started as a Bachmann ready to run, 1 to 22.5 scale caboose. And I made my own sides and made all my own hand railings. I made everything. Basically built a car on a core of a car that was once there, and made an entire caboose in a period of about a year and a half in my dorm room, and then brought it home and painted it.
Right.
And
practically built it from the ground up, but it's really
it was practically built from the ground up.
Yeah.
I think that in order to be a scratch builder or someone who's into scratch building, you really want to have something unique. And there are certain people in the hobby that like running trains, and that's really all they want to do, and that's fun. There's I certainly fall in that boat sometimes. I'm not someone that wants to be building nonstop constantly. I get spurs of inspiration to work on a project. I have a locomotive sitting on my workbench right now that I haven't touched in almost a week. Hard to find inspiration to work on a shay when you're stuck on a real one all week long. But believe me, it wears on you after a while. But I think that you really want to have something unique, and it's because there's no reason to put in the effort to kit bash or scratch build. It's a lot of work, unless you really want to have something that is uniquely yours. And that's the thing, is that there's some people, especially seemingly in the younger generation, but even in the older generation, who just want to run trains, and that's perfectly fine. And I think that the consumer market that you're talking about, Drew, is catering to those people, because otherwise they might not be in the hobby, right? So I think it's a way to include people who are more discerning in the hobby, but might not have the skill or time to scratch build. It brings them into the hobby more. So I think it's a good thing in some ways.
That's interesting. It is expanding the hobby by expanding the base because you want operators as well as builders. That makes a lot of sense. We have actually quite a few questions that keep coming up, but we're talking on. It's pretty cool because we're actually staying on topic. So let's try to do some quick ones, real quick here. Sparky wants to know.
Hi, Dave.
Right, right. Dave, the infamous water tower destroyer.
Yeah. Speaking of ways that we didn't think people could screw something up, there you go.
Right. Yep.
Thanks, Sparky.
Running into a water tower that no one has ever run into ever in the history of the railroad, and hand the throttle to Dave, and 10 seconds later, you've got a destroyed water tower. He has a real talent. So the question is about whether or not model railroading is still a closet hobby. Like, you don't go around telling people, hey, I'm into model railroading.
I love this question. I love this question.
It's definitely not something I go around saying. So, pass the ball.
I would be laughed out when I went to high school if I wore train shirts every day and tried to explain my hobby. I would be laughed out of school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Up until senior year at high school, I never mentioned the train hobby whatsoever. And then I got to senior year, and I just decided I don't really care. I'm not going to be friends with any of you people in a few years. So here's what I do here's what I do with my free time.
You don't. What you're saying is you don't show up as a freshman and tell people like trains because you get your butt kicked every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The girls won't like you.
Right.
Oh, I wouldn't say
You go out with a bang. It's just you leave yourself with an impression. And you just, if anyone wants to judge you the last year, it's on them. It's on
that point. At that point, you don't care because you're a senior and seniors rule. What about you, Clint? Is it a closet hobby or?
For me, it wasn't. I told everybody.
Yeah.
This is what I found out, right? Because when I was younger, right, it was kind of a big deal. It's like, do I want to? I don't know if I want to tell anybody. And after a while, I just said, you know what? I don't care anymore. This is a part of me. Even when it came to talking to girls, one of the things that I used to do back in high school, going into college, I would take, if there was a girl that I was interested in, I would take her down to the train club, just me and her.
Oh my god!
And just
you're ballsy,
bro. So here's the thing, and this was something I wanted to talk about in my podcast, was like relationships and model railroading. But the thing is this: if she's going to be a quality girl, that's a girl that you want to have on your arm. She needs to be able to accept all parts of you. And if it's something that's very important to you, and for all of us here, model railroading is something that's near and dear to our hearts. That's a huge part of us, right? Mm-hmm. You need to be able to accept that. If you can't accept that, there's the door. And that's just the way it's got to be. What I learned over the years, because I used to, there were some girls that loved it, and then there were some girls that didn't like it. And then even when it came to my friends, there were some that were like really responsive to it and some that weren't. It helps you weed out the certain people in your life when you show them something like that, because I always loved seeing a person's reaction. There's even a video on my YouTube channel. One of my closest friends at the time, her name was Zaina. There's a video on my channel called Letting an Outsider In. And it was her first time I brought her down to the train club. And it's her reaction, like looking at she said, oh my God, the little cows. Oh my God, the people. Oh my God. And it like you get to see that experience from someone else's perspective. But I would say this to younger people: don't let it be a closet hobby. It all comes, honestly, what I say is it comes down to how you present it. If you present it with confidence, like, hey, this is what I'm into. This is why it's cool. This is why I enjoy it. And then you show people what it is, and you show them the technology behind it, show them the modeling aspect of it, just show them just how involved the hobby is. It takes a lot of knowledge and, a certain level of intelligence to be in this hobby. People will end up respecting you for that. And that was one of the things that I learned over the years after just bringing so many people down. And if they didn't like it, well, there's the door. So,
wow.
I kind of like that, having the courage to put it out there, and you will find out who's supportive and who isn't. Mm-hmm. Right? I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
What's this one? Does anybody on the panel volunteer? Well, we kind of got this. We know Trevor works on railroads. What about you other guys? Do you do anything in preservation or history or volunteering at places?
I used to volunteer at the Golden Gate Railroad Museum along with Trevor. We did a lot of work getting them ready for their big move to a location that did not pan out, but that was okay. We still learned a lot, and they're a little bit too far away from us now to help out, but we're happy to see them doing pretty decently. But yeah, we certainly learned a lot, changing air hoses and painting graphite lubricant on the bottom of brake rigging and climbing and on the 2472's running boards and tarping it and climbing on the cab. And we learned a lot of stuff.
Anybody else volunteering?
I guess I'll chime in here. This is actually fairly recent, as of a few months ago, but I am going to be on the forefront, one of the head chair members of a new, what will be eventually a railway museum here in Utah. It's called the Western Crossroads Railway Museum. Right now, we're just going to be a digital archive, but going forward, we've got a lot of big plans in the works. We're waiting for a few things to clear before then, but I'm currently signed up as the treasurer for the society at the moment, and we're going to start blowing up pretty crazy later this year. We have a few things on. If you're interested in checking us out, we have a lot going on the Facebook page, which is Western Crossroads Railway Museum. And there's a lot of information there. If you're a Rio Grande enthusiast in any way, we've uploaded a lot of documentation, and we've got a lot more to come. So we're doing some new preservation. This is a very little known name, and we're trying to get the word out there largely.
Well, that'll be cool to learn more about that as it develops. Make sure you keep me in the loop.
I will absolutely do that.
Yeah. I don't know if you've already invited me to like that Facebook page, but if you haven't, please do. And I
will absolutely do that.
Cool. So Trevor, now I happen to know because I got the email about it, but you're also involved with trying to restore that climax, right?
Oh, yeah. Wow. So a little bit of backstory on this. So for those who don't know, geared steam engines, there's three main types: the Shay, the Heisler, and the Climax. Right. Roaring Camp has 3 Shay locomotives, one of which runs, one of which is under a major rebuild, and one of which is candidate for restoration. And then we have an operating Heisler. But we had an operating Climax on property and still do have it, although the engine was, I believe, the last Climax running in logging service on the East Coast. It ran at the Elk River Coal Lumber Company, and it was really messed up, like badly messed up. If you ever see pictures of this railroad, people can always tell this railroad because it's the only logging road I've ever seen pictures of that literally decided, no, we're not going to deal with building bridges. We're just going to lay our track right through the middle of the stream bed. And they ran the engine directly through the middle of a raging river. And there's pictures of it up to the top of the trucks in water. So it's pretty messed up, right? And about 10 years ago or so, the CEO of Roaring Camp at the time, Georgiana Clark, who was the founder, Norman Clark's wife, realized that there was no way we were ever going to rebuild the locomotive for revenue service under the for-profit Roaring Camp Incorporated. It was just too expensive. It's a multi-million-dollar restoration. The thing is in horrible shape. So at the time, a nonprofit was set up called the RWH Foundation, which RWH is short for Railway and Western History Foundation. And that was created with the intent of rebuilding the Climax. Well, in that time, Georgiana passed away. And it was kind of always a promise to her to rebuild the locomotive. That was unfortunately never accomplished during her lifetime. But in the last year or so, myself, a few of our other main engine house crew members, Lonnie Clark, our current CEO, and a few others have all been working to kind of get this nonprofit off the ground. The website and the Facebook page and social media stuff are now up. There's a few hangups right now, particularly the fact that it's hard to work on a restoration project where you're in close proximity to people during COVID. And the other problem is just getting the facility set up, because our Roaring Camp shop is pretty minuscule. It's not very big. And the nonprofit crew cannot work in the same shop as the for-profit crew due to the state laws about the involvement of the for-profit and the nonprofit and this and that. So we have to basically start from scratch, setting up a facility and setting up, getting tools, getting power, water, all that stuff. And it's a lot harder to get people to donate to, let's get containers and, let's put fencing around it, as opposed to let's rebuild the engine. So it's a lot harder to do that. We're planning on doing a fundraiser coming up here within the next couple of months for specifically tools and a container to store all the parts in and that sort of thing. And then once we get the base facility set up, then we can actually start rebuilding the engine. But it's a very involved project. It's actually a standard gauge locomotive, but we're going to be making it 3-foot narrow gauge. And it basically is ground up. I mean, even the frame has to be rebuilt. It is, There's not much left of it. I mean, the frame's there, but from all the coal cinders landing on it, it eroded the metal and caused it to delaminate in a lot of places. The boiler is off of another locomotive because the original boiler had rebar welded in where the stay bolts were. The boiler got condemned when it was in West Virginia in 1963.
I was going to say that sounds really safe.
There's a reason it got condemned, and it actually ran on a tourist railroad after that until like 1977 or so, and they regauged it to 42-inch gauge, 4-foot gauge, and they did a really bad job of it. So they just pressed, they pulled the wheels in. They didn't actually make new axles. They put spacers in to keep them away from the journal boxes. And it is an atrocious job. It needs a lot of work. So
when you're ready to do that fundraising push, I know a guy that would be very excited to promote something like that.
I know a guy for that too.
Yeah, let me know when that's happening.
Posted on it. It's rwhfoundation.com. And you can find it on Facebook as well. It's fairly much in the beginning stages right now. There's not a lot there. The first step is assessing what we have,
right,
because there's a lot of unknowns. So once we are able, though, to actually bring people in when COVID restrictions lift more, we would be able to start accepting volunteers and get people actually wrenching on it. Because the first step is just purely taking it apart and seeing what we got.
That time is coming soon because the vaccinations are on a pretty fast track. So
yep, I get my first tomorrow.
Oh, cool. Anybody else on the panel involved with any kind of historic restoration projects?
So I turned 16, and that's the kind of FRA age where you can start doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I live half an hour drive, 20 to 30 minute drive away from the Wilmington Western, which has 2 operating steam locomotives. So they're kind of between volunteer operation coordinators right now. So it took me 3 weeks to get in contact with somebody. So then I did, and it's taking me a while to get into it just because of everything that's going on there. They've been through 2 or 3 executive directors within the past couple years after their guy who'd been there reopened the whole thing, retired. So, it's kind of a political situation going on there, but I'm trying to get into it.
What about you, Clint? Is there anything near you that you can be active with? Or
there is a historical society near me. I never really took much interest in it. There's not really much for restoration either. I don't know. I think even if there were, though, I just don't have the time for it. There's so many other things going on that I have to get done. But definitely maybe later on down the road, if there's something that presents itself, I might take advantage of it, but not at the moment. So
okay, let's rapid fire a couple questions here because, like I said, we do have a bunch of questions that came in. I like this because usually we're sitting around talking and there's not a lot of questions. This time there's a lot of questions. So let's do a rapid fire around the table for this one. Do you prefer running trains on your own layout or at a friend's or at a club?
I have a 4x6 crash test dummy. So it goes without saying that I prefer to go to other people's 2,000 square foot locations.
Okay. We went out of order. Whatever. Let's go Clint next.
If I had my own layout, I definitely prefer to run on my own layout. because I can do things the way I want to do it. But I always love running on the club. Clubs are always fun. So
Okay, Paul.
I don't have an operating layout right now, so currently other people's layouts. But yeah, if I had my own, I'd prefer to run on that most of the time.
Trevor.
For smaller scales, HO, I'd probably prefer a club. Although there's clubs around here, but not on this side of the hill. So for smaller scales, I have a 10x12 layout, but I built it in 7th grade, so it's not really up to my standards.
Right.
So until I build a new layout, I don't really run my HO stuff that much. But as far as the larger scales like G or F scale, as the case may be, I prefer to run on my own layout in that case.
The Fern Creek and Western?
Fern Creek F. Fern Creek and Western, yes.
Yeah.
Well, because, in a way, that's almost, it's not really my layout, right? It's like, it's at Eric's house, so it's not really my layout. It's almost a club layout in its own way, because we have so many people working on it now. We have probably 6 people now that work on it regularly. So, in a way, it's almost like a club layout now.
You know what, though? I bet if you were to ask Eric if it was your layout, he would say it's your layout.
He would.
He would say that to probably anybody who's put in the time that you guys have put into it. If I ask him if it,
and money,
right? And if I ask him if it was my layout, I don't think he would tell me it was my layout.
No, but I definitely don't like to think of it as my layout. I know it kind of sometimes falls to that sometimes because I put a lot of effort and time into it. Yeah. But there's a lot of people who put in effort and time elsewhere. Eric does the basic maintenance stuff that I just don't have time for sometimes. When I'm away at college, Eric and Paul are the ones that keep the tracking level. Right. We have our friend building a structure right now in his house that he's not at the railroad every day, but he's working on the structure. We have people who come in and help us prune trees. I can't do it all by myself, so it's a joint effort. It's not my layout. It's a lot of other people's who help with it.
Yeah, it's kind of all of your guys' layout.
Yeah, it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah. So it looks like Sean didn't want to answer this question. He just
Yeah, I'm right here. My camera just decided to have a stroke.
Oh.
I love when that happens.
So I'll answer this one. I'll answer this one real quick. Option A, not much of an option for me. Don't have my own layout. Options B and C. Ideally, I like operating on a private layout simply for the fact of operations, because that's one of my favorite parts of the hobby. Club layouts are fun. The most club layout experience I have is a Fremo module setup, and that's kind of the chance for me to do show and tell with my own trains. But I'd have to choose a private layout.
Are you part of that Hostlers group that sets up in Ogden every year?
I am not.
Okay, so there's another Fremo? Because they're Fremo, aren't they?
So Hostlers is not Fremo. They're their own standard doing their own thing.
Okay. I thought they were a Fremo. I knew that they were modular, but I just didn't know if they were Fremo or not.
Yeah, no, there's a Fremo group that's based out of Utah. That's a handful of guys. And we just did a setup a couple weeks ago at a mall down in Orem.
Okay.
And that was a lot of fun.
And that's an HO scale group too, though?
Yes, that is.
Okay, very cool. Here's a question for you guys. What do you think of the NMRA?
Oh boy. Drew, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, yesterday I became the youngest person to give an NMRAX clinic, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't warrant being a member of the NMRA. I just haven't done it because I haven't really. You need like a sponsor or whatever. I haven't really gone through the steps, but.
Oh, I didn't know that. If you're a minor, you need somebody else to sponsor you to join?
Well, I was in a the Modeler's Life Zoom, and I heard people talking before they knew I was there, and they were saying something, about what happens when young people are involved in the equation. There have to be policies, and in 2020 they made a whole bunch of new policies about that and such, but I don't know. The NMRA, when I interviewed Gordy Robinson, I kind of got another understanding of it, and it's great that he's president for real now instead of just the acting president like he was for 2020. I don't know. I think Gordy's going to bring it to more than just being standards. He's really making it more of a community, like NMRAX, for example. Free clinics, 6 hours /8 hours /12/24 frequently changing, but it's becoming more of a resource than a quote unquote source of standards that it's been known for the past couple decades.
Anybody else want to tackle NMRA?
I'll throw in my 2 cents. I never personally saw much use in it for myself. Most of the stuff that I learned came from the people around me or YouTube videos. I never really had much purpose or use for NMRA. I was a member when I was younger, when I was a part of a club, because the clubs need that to get their insurance from the NMRA. But outside of that, NMRA never really did much for me personally. I know that they're a fantastic resource. They have awesome things. They created certain standards, but just generally speaking, for my involvement in the hobby, what I've done, NMRA never really did much for me personally. So,
okay, open table. Who's going next?
As a source for standards, it's been great. Just for, especially in a scale that's somewhat developing, like F scale, it's been really nice to have standards from them. But as an organization, I really haven't been involved at all with them. I've never been a member, and really don't have no other opinion on it other than the fact that they thankfully make standards.
Yeah, I think that may be arguably the most important thing they've done for the hobby in, since whatever 1937 or whenever it was. Might even have been earlier than that. But what about you, Paul? Do you have any opinion about the NMRA?
Yeah, I mean, standard-wise, it's extremely helpful, track gauges and all that kind of stuff. But as a group, I mean, if you find it helpful for you, then maybe that's something to do. But I've never been involved with it. So as much as it would be cool to have, Paul Nolan MMR, Master Model Railroader or something, if I do something good enough, I can call myself a Master Model Railroader.
Yeah, that's a whole slew of steps to get to that point.
I know it is. You have to compete and I'm not into all that, that kind of stuff.
What about you, Sean? Do you have any opinion about the NMRA? I mean, obviously, you working for Exactrail, you have to appreciate what they've done for standards, right?
Honestly, I'm going to echo just about everything said here. Personally, I was in the NMRA group that's local here in northern Utah. If anything, I made friends out of it, and that's about as far as I went with it. I personally didn't have much of a... I'm not going to say I had a negative experience. It was just I made friends. It was fun. It was a social event. But in terms of the NMRA, it was basically just a club in the way I see it.
Right.
They're a great source of standards. They're a good way to make friends. But outside of that, I don't have much of a preference, and beyond that, I don't have much to comment on in regards to the NMRA.
I think that it really depends on what you said, Sean, which is where you are. Because I know that some regions are more friendly toward young people, for example. In other regions, it's just like a bunch of old guys, who aren't very welcoming to kids or welcoming really to anybody that they don't already know, right? I've heard a lot of mixed stories about people's experiences with approaching their local chapters or I guess regions or divisions of the NMRA, and it goes like that. Some are really good, some are really bad. I feel really lucky because at least in where I live, our division in our region seems to be full of really great people. So I'm all excited about it. We just had a convention yesterday that was the annual Pacific Coast Region convention. It was going to be held in Fresno, but because of the COVID, they had to cancel the in-person convention, and we did the whole thing virtually yesterday using Zoom. And it was actually a really cool experience. And I think that we managed to pull off something that was very much, I guess, a parallel to what you would get from being at an in-person convention, because it provided a lot of sort of interactive possibilities, socially interactive possibilities, which has been kind of missing, I think, from most of the online offerings that have been going around for the past year and a half. So we're going to do another question, and I have a question for you guys. Let me just bring it up here. Whoops, it keeps disappearing. There it goes. This is for Sean, actually. deciding factor for you to choose the era that you model?
Well, in response to Brian here, hello. He's a guy who regularly infiltrates my work, so I have to deal with this guy regularly. How you doing, Brian? So deciding factor, I said this earlier, but growing up, I immediately had an affection for the Utah Railway. I actually live about a mile from one of their train yards here in Midvale, Utah. And I used to go there at a much younger age, and I used to see trains, and that was like one of my very first memories of seeing like actual trains. I put that in like air quotes simply because my only other real experience with trains was light rail. So my experience with actual trains was solely the Utah Railway, and that's what I always could consistently see. And then I kind of, when I got into modeling, I kind of bounced around here and there on a few things. And then when I worked in Provo, Utah Railway was half a mile away. And so at that point, I decided, why not always just do the thing which I know and love and I grew up with? Let's do Utah Railway. And so I just deep dived on that a little too heavy. If you would ask my girlfriend, she would definitely say that. I've deep dived way too heavy on it. And it's just turned into a great thing. And I just narrowed my focus down on that one solid thing, and I've become an expert in my own subject here.
Right. It reminds me of the cartoon where it's presumably a husband and wife in bed, and they're facing away from each other, and there's those little thought bubbles. And the wife is thinking something like, oh, he's thinking of another woman or something. And he's thinking, which train do I get next or something like that. It's like totally opposite worlds, Oh, that's funny. So we're coming down to the end here because we usually go for about 90 minutes on these things, and that's about 4 minutes from now. So we'll go through this last, because I have a question I've been saving up for you guys, and I want to provide a little bit of context for it, and then we'll go around with that. And if there's no more questions, we'll call it. But I want to know that, okay, so a lot of times I've talked with younger people, and their response about being involved or not in, especially model railroading, I think is the main one that this shows up in, is an experience that they had with people that were very unsupportive. Like they went to a museum or a railroad club or whatever to go see what it was, or they were taken there as kids by their parents. And the people were grouchy and grumpy and yelled at them like, get that damn kids away from my models, so that, get your hands off of that, and all that kind of sort of, discouraging talk that we talked about earlier. So the question is, what do you think? Because it wasn't that long ago when you were a kid, right? Say 10 years ago, 5 years ago for some of the people on. Because I would think 16 is a kid, right? What can the people do that are in these places to make it more friendly toward kids? Oh, or what the top secret producer just said. What would you do to change about club's operations if you're in charge of that?
I guess I'll take the first plunge on this one, I guess.
Sure.
I'll speak from personal experience that I have had quite a few negative experiences actually with this very Framo group that I'm now with. And it was very, it's kind of like model railroad NIMBYism, where it's like not in my backyard, or it's like a good old boys club where it's just, you have this group of guys who are just these elitists, and then you have this younger guy or younger guys come in, and they want to just have fun. They just want to change things, and they don't want to hear it. The older guys don't want to hear it. And they're perceived, like, this feels weird to say, but they're perceived as like a threat. And the easiest way to deter a threat is to try and scare it off. And so in terms of organization, there's a social disconnect, especially between a lot of guys in the hobby who naturally are like retirees. And then you've got a bunch of younger guys who like us, who are going to school, who are working full time, and we just don't have the time. And like, for example, like some club layout setups, like, oh yeah, we're going to do our meetings on Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Well, I'm at work. I'm taking my lunch break at 2:00 on Wednesday, and your meeting is 45 miles away. I'm not going to be able to make it. And so outreach for a club is try and work with people of all demographics, because that's what I've noticed in a few of the local clubs here. They want to do these meetings at these really, really obscure times. And that right there, you're automatically jeopardizing your younger and your, for lack of a better word, working class crowd from actually being able to fully participate. And then due to that lack of participation, the other crowd, the older bunch, they perceive the younger guys as a negative target, as they're inactive, or there's no younger people in this hobby. So club operations is you just need to be understanding of everybody's situation.
So am I hearing this right? You're saying it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you make it hard for people to participate, of course they can't, right?
Yes, exactly. And I've had that exact same thing happen. Where I wasn't fully included, I wasn't told everything, and that I was the one that got mad at.
Yeah. Huh. What about you, Drew? Can you think of anything that you would do differently or change? Or?
Well, I've definitely faced what he's saying. Obviously, being 16, I face people looking at me as not knowing anything when I walk up to them. And I'm really lucky that the leading powers at my local clubs and groups of people aren't like that at all. They're very supportive, and the people who are in charge they can identify when that's happening and they can put an end to it. But people within these organizations are definitely trying to do that. That's the wrong word. They've definitely done that before, and I've noticed it. So one specifically thing that happened was my club is nearing 2 decades old, just past that. And the wiring, this happened in the year before COVID, desperately needed to be updated. And there were older members who were saying, it's fine, don't touch it. Everything works great, when you couldn't make a loop around it without having to push it in the least convenient spots possible. So over the past year, new people came in, and them combined with the people who were previously there that couldn't themselves overpower the naysayers, redid all the wiring, and now it works flawlessly, and stuff was improved, updated, all that. And you can just see how they identified that and put an end to it. And I'm lucky myself that I have people like that in my community who've supported myself and, the organization itself like that, when I know a lot of people aren't that fortunate.
You would think that, especially in a situation such as what you just described, that they would want you to help, because you're able to get under the layout, right?
Yeah.
And these old guys, that's one of the last things you want to do, because one thing I keep hearing more and more as I get older is, if you get down to do something, be sure you have a plan to get back up.
Yeah. But I'm very fortunate in the way that the people who were in charge and the greater majority of people were on my side in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good. It's good to have someone who sticks up for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what you're saying is that as a young person, you need to find someone who's going to do that, or as older people, they need to go out of their way to be supportive, right?
Well, I feel like the older people in my case were supportive without me saying anything. Like, they identified it on their own and put an end to it without specifically identifying it to anybody, which I think is the best possible way it could have ended. And I want to stress that it was the greater majority who weren't like that, But just the fact that that minority was easily put to the side of the road and overpowered was It's good to see that, because in a lot of cases, like reading these live chat posts, people driven away because they're pushed over by people who think they're the superior group, when luckily in my case they could be pushed to the side of the road.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Clint? Do you have any advice or something that people could take away from it's almost it's hard to see you. Your camera's still on, right?
Right. There's a few things I would say. There's a couple ways you can look at it. So to answer the question specifically, if I were to be in charge of a club and I was trying to get more young people involved, there's a couple different things that I would do. One, you need to have a social media presence. That was one of the things when I became a member of my club when I was 14, and that's when I started my YouTube train channel at the same time. We actually got new members because of my channel. that's very important for the life of your club to have a social media presence, especially for younger people. The other thing is have open houses, also have layouts that you can break down and take down to shows to get more people, more younger people into your club, and have dedicated trains set up for new people that are just walking through the door. Have dedicated trains that they can run, have a controller set to the side, or if you've got the capability, have the Y throttle set up so people can run trains with their phone. Make everything as easily accessible for your guests as possible, and make it inviting. That was one of the problems that my club had after a while, was we stopped going to shows for a long period of time, and that's because nobody wanted to take the time to take the layout apart and set it back up, and it was frustrating. It became frustrating after a while, but these things are important. Just to keep the club alive, from the standpoint of being a young person, going into the club and staying motivated and not getting discouraged, you've got to have a certain level of drive within yourself. I'm going to say this because we've talked a lot tonight about, older people being apprehensive about letting younger people run their trains or doing certain things. I would say this: none of the people here on this panel have this problem, but I have seen this at shows and in club settings. You have to be the kind of young person that's approachable. You have, if you're loud, obnoxious, you're wayward, you don't seem like you would be able to handle these models. People are not going to invite you to do certain things. People, you have to be someone who's approachable. And that's with anything you do in life, right? But specifically with model trains, be someone who an older person is going to want to mentor. You have to have the right kind of attitude and present yourself where it's just like a job interview. It's the same thing. If you want to run the trains at the club, strike up a conversation with somebody who's running the train. Talk to them. Maybe they'll invite you to an op session. Maybe they'll invite you to their home layout. Those kind of things. They won't do that if they feel that you're going to abuse their equipment, because it takes a lot of time and money spent on this stuff, and not everybody should have access to it, quite frankly. But at the same time, you do need older people to reach out to the younger people to keep the hobby alive. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
I kind of like how you incorporated. Well, you touched on a lot of stuff. That was very thoughtful. It sounds like you've thought about this a lot, Clint.
No, I've a little experience with it. So
right, social media, because you go to where the people are. That's very important. I've thought about that myself a lot. And then I like the fact that you've also included some personal responsibility as well, because if you appear to be, a bratty kid, no one's going to want you around. So I think that's a good point. What do you think, Trevor?
I definitely second Clint on the social media thing. I've seen a lot of clubs that don't have, and even like stores, for instance, that don't have social media present. We have one in the Bay Area. We have, John, you know which store I'm talking about, and so do you, Paul. No website, no social media. How are you expecting people to find it, get into it, if you don't have some sort of presence out there? Because that's where everyone goes to find their information now.
It is. And especially as your customer base ages out, right? Right. And aging out, though, is actually what I was going to talk about. Now, in terms of the model railroading thing, I definitely agree. You just can't be a grouch. You got to let people be able to get into it and be hands-on, like I talked about earlier. But just to bring in some of the real railroading perspective side, because the same thing happens in the full-size world, where you have kids coming around and the old guy on the engine, I don't get away, kid, blah, 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 blah. I was very fortunate that didn't happen to me too much. I mean, I certainly had experiences with it, especially, when management found out I was hanging around the locomotives. That didn't go over too well. Especially in the full-size world, the older crew is aging out, and it's not something that is passed on through textbooks or through employee handbooks or computer training or anything like that. You really have to be there doing the job with someone who has experience, because I will tell you, the day in and day out of firing the locomotive, for instance, it is virtually the same thing over and over again up and down the mountain.
right? You know, it becomes pretty easy once you've done it a bunch of times. But it's when something goes wrong, something happens you don't know how to deal with. That's when you really learn something, and you need to have the older people pass down that knowledge through an apprenticeship program, essentially, of how to deal with problems as they arise, how to deal with, you know, even the day in and day out stuff. There's little tricks in there that they'll teach you. And I think that Roaring Camp at least has an extremely good track record of passing that down to people, because they know how is the business going to run if you don't have younger people that know how to do this stuff, right? You know, the older people can't do it for long, you know, and especially in a physically intensive job like that, the older people, they age out. They just purely cannot do it anymore.
Well, it's like I was saying before about sitting. If you go down to do something, make sure you can get back up. It's the same thing.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about.
I mean, I'll tell you, Paul and I, when we operated on Jim Vale's layout, there were multiple times where Jim sent us under the layout to fix a wiring issue or something like that. You remember that? Oh, yeah. Because he couldn't get under there anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can go down and fix that. Here, this goes to that goes to that, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so but not to get too off track, I think that apprenticeship programs apply in the same regard to model railroading, right? The knowledge of how to do things gets passed on somehow. And thankfully in model railroading, there's a lot of resources like YouTube videos and clinics and things like that where that information can get passed on. But I think presenting it in a way that is interesting to young people and it takes into account the fact that you're teaching someone that's starting from scratch, right? In a lot of cases, is important. And I think that's sometimes what people miss, especially in model railroading, is the fact that with you're trying to pass on the hobby of model railroading to young people, you need to assume you're starting kind of from scratch in a lot of ways. You need to assume to teach the basics, and you need to find a way to present that in a way that's interesting to younger people.
Yeah. I was waiting to get to Paul because for most of this time he was kind of like this, like he was deep in thought.
He's always deep in thought. He's thinking about something.
Yeah.
Probably not trains though.
Right. Well, I can't really talk on the club thing, but I can certainly say that, you know, throughout your experience with trains, you might come across people that are just the right person to take you under their wing. And I've been lucky enough to have people close by. I can think of 3. I had a neighbor down a couple of roads from me who used to fly model airplanes in a great big field. And I got talking to him for a while about his model airplanes because I thought they were so cool. And he took me to his house and explained that he was a conductor on the Santa Fe. And he knew that I loved trains, and he could really see that I loved them so much that he, you know, would buy like photographs and bought a light with my name printed on it, and gave me a bunch of equipment and taught me, you know, signals and stuff. And that was really nice. There was him, and then there was, of course, Eric Child, who I've known since, I don't know, like 2007 at least. I went there on the very first year of the Museum of Art and History display with my first grade class, and we saw the train display there, and who knew that Eric, Trevor, and I would be such great friends. So there's another nice person. And of course, Jim Vale, who was a master model railroader who passed away in 2018. All very generous people that, you know, whether, you know, just by luck or not, you might come across them. And if they're the right person with the right amount of knowledge, it might not matter how many people you meet, but if there's one that can teach you so much, then it might be really beneficial. Yeah.
It's hard to believe it's already been 3 years, isn't it?
Yeah. We knew him for a long time too. So
yeah. Interesting. Well, we actually ended up going a little bit longer than I expected to, but I do want to thank you guys for taking the time here. And hopefully people watching will have learned something about the perspective of younger people in the hobby and what what we can do as older people to sort of help people along, because I really don't think that the hobby is dying like a lot of people say. I think the hobby is changing. And we talked actually a fair amount about social media. One of the really cool things I think about what I've been doing on this channel for the past 15 years is that I know of many cases. One of the cases I have on the top of my mind is someone who's talking in our chat right now, of people who saw something on my channel and then they went there and joined. They joined the club because they saw the layout tour, or they went to the Niles Canyon or to Roaring Camp because they saw it and were like, oh, well, that's really cool. So I do think there's a big element of, social media interaction and social media presence that will meet young people where they are, where they exist, where their world is. Mm-hmm. So I'm not surprised that came up in our conversation. So thanks to everybody here. If you want to hang out for a couple of minutes, I'll usually run the credits and then we'll BS for a couple minutes after we're done. So does anybody else have anything else you want to say before I sign it off?
Are we allowed to plug stuff?
Yeah, plug stuff. Everybody plug something.
Drew at Nordell MRRC on YouTube. Post irregularly, but every Friday I have a live show with Clint and whoever else shows up.
Sometimes I'm even there.
We had James Wright. We have Shane Wilson's going to join us in May. George Bogatuk's going to join us when his hockey season ends. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Is that what he told you, Drew? Because I think he plays year round.
Oh, really?
I'm just kidding. I don't know when the season ends.
I thought it ended. He said April 11th, but then I didn't respond because my life got really, really busy for a week. So I'll need to reopen that conversation. Anyway.
So is he going to be on one of the Friday night shows?
Yeah.
Oh, make sure you let me know when he's going to be there. I'll show up for that one.
Oh.
I just talked to George a couple of days ago. So what about, is that it? Was that all you want to plug?
I mean, if you were about to bring up something, I'd be happy to further
No,
promote.
I'm waiting for other people to plug stuff.
I know Clint wants to plug something.
Geez, just throw me under the bus, dude. No.
No, he's giving you the spotlight. Here, hold on a second. You ready, Clint? You should do this. Let me spotlight you. You can be the dude.
Oh, we're gonna do a room tour just like we did 2 weeks ago on my channel.
So everybody, y'all can little ASMR free. Y'all can catch me at it. No, you guys can follow me on YouTube. You guys can follow me on YouTube at the Steam King. That's all one word. Don't space it out. Or you can type in Railroad Kid 1937. That was the old channel name. You can find me either way on YouTube. I do a podcast. I do Drew's podcast on his channel every week. It's Drew. This is my time.
Quit interrupting him. He has the spotlight.
I do. But I do a podcast. I do Drew's podcast once a week, and then I also do one on Saturdays on my channel, the live stream podcast. The last one I did was an interview with James Wright.
That was good too, by the way.
Thank you, sir. A lot of people really enjoyed that one. So if you want, check that out as well. But other than that, you can also add me on Facebook, Clint Brantley. That'll pop right up. It's a picture of a big boy. Just go ahead, click on that, add me. And looking forward. If you have any questions or want to contact me, feel free to do that over my YouTube channel or on Facebook.
Can I tell you
about your
something?
second channel? You gotta plug the whole thing.
Not that one. Nope, we don't talk about that.
We don't talk about that.
Is that like TSG Channel 3? We don't talk about it.
Well, it's if you made a TSG Channel 9, that's kind of what his second channel would be.
Oh. Yeah. Well, can I say something, Clint? That I was really shocked when you asked him one question. James, right?
I think
you know what I'm going to say, don't you?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're going to say. I had to know.
Yeah.
Right.
We've all wanted to know. So, I mean.
Look, I knew a lot of other people wanted to know, too. But
we got the answer.
I kind of felt like I was the only one that was going to ask it.
But for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, would somebody like to say it?
John was. I think he was going to
go ahead, Drew. I know you know. Yeah. What did Clint ask James?
I don't want to say it.
Shocking. I thought it was. When he said it, I was like, I can't believe he just said that.
I
That's where you go watch
rewinded it.
that
And I was
That's
like,
that's
what?
what a lot of people tell me about my videos on my channel. Did he actually just say? But what? Did he say that?
Well,
Oh.
most of the did you say that it's about like Broadway Limited. It's not about like this.
There you go.
Well, I guess people can watch the video. That'll get more
Yeah.
people to go watch it. But
Yeah,
he
What
also
was it?
questioned
Now we're all
it.
curious. You gotta tell us.
Do you want to tell him, Clint? You said, well, you
We can do it in the, we can do it in the session afterwards. We can do it in the
Just
session.
everyone go watch the video. How about that?
Yeah,
We can-
everybody
we can-
else.
We can talk
everybody
about
else-
it in the after session.
If it's literally in
Oh,
the middle,
yeah.
it's literally in the middle of the video. But when y'all go check out the interview I did with James, it's in the middle. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I led up to it really well. I said, James, listen, for years,
Yeah.
I've been wondering this ever since I've been watching your channel. I just gotta ask, man. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. You gotta watch the video.
Yeah.
To see what the question was.
I'll tell you guys off camera. It was a
valid
weird,
question, and we all wanted to know, and we got the answer.
it was a weird question, and I felt awkward watching it. To be
Yeah,
honest.
me too. I definitely
Because-
squirmed a bit.
And I'll tell you why though, because to me it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you like people for who they are, right?
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
So or not. So anybody else want to plug something? I saw that Sean's camera came back on for a minute. Is there anything, Sean, that you wanted to? I mean, you kind of talked about the historical thing that you're working on. Is there anything else?
Yeah, well, if my camera can cooperate for more than 2 minutes in a go, there's two things I'll plug. Firstly is if you want to hear or learn about more of my crazy Utah Railway ventures, I've got a Facebook page for that. It's called the Utah Railway Summit Division. And it's just where I kind of throw up all my modeling projects. Forewarning, they're not all Utah Railway related. I had a little bit of fun. Like I put an Iron Maiden song into a Scale Trains locomotive just because I could.
You're turning
That
into
sounds like
Rapido.
something, dude. That's something I would have done.
Well, it was the Santa Fe 666, so it felt necessary to put Number of the Beast
Number
into
of the
it.
Beast, of course, you have to.
So that'll be my first plug. So if you want to check out some of my modeling projects, it's on that page. Secondly, I host a similar train podcast called the Railroad Roll By Podcast. It's featuring myself and my co-host, who is a big radio guy here in Utah, Todd Newcomb. We put out episodes once in a blue moon. We're trying to get better at it, do it slightly more frequently, but they're pretty entertaining. We've interviewed guests like I can't think of his name now. Ed Dickens with the UP Steam Team. We've brought in the guys from Trains Magazine. Our last guest was Matt Bound from Extreme Trains. So we've had a lot of fun guests on there. So go check that out. We'll have more episodes coming soon.
Cool.
And that's it for me.
Trevor and Paul, you guys got anything to plug?
Go like.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, go like the Fern Creek and Western Facebook page.
Well, yeah. So I guess that's
right.
the first thing. Go like the Fern Creek and Western Facebook page and visit the website fcwgrr.com. Then Paul and I for those of you who are at the beginning would know this already, but Paul and I co-operate a YouTube channel with the very long and drawn-out name Tree Frog Flag Productions.
It's all one word.
One word, except
Very-
Productions is the second word. But
Very awkward.
yeah,
Frog flag.
it
We're in the
long.
middle
There's
of
a long
rebrand.
backstory to that, but it's gonna be. It's soon probably. We're leaning towards just TFF Productions to make it simple. But regardless, there's a lot of kind of documentary style railroad videos on there, with a couple more coming, hopefully fairly soon. And
I just thought of something.
what?
You can make it TFG Multimedia. So when you answer the phone, say TFG Multimedia, they won't know if you're saying TSG or TFG because it sounds almost the same on the
Well,
phone.
that would be great.
Is there an official TSG multimedia hotline? I wasn't aware of this.
It is for some. There is for some people, but I don't share that.
We can set up another Patreon page and have people give money to the wrong Patreon page.
TFG, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that'll get them.
Yeah,
We
hold on.
make train videos.
There has to be some character in another language that looks exactly like an S, so then you
Yeah.
can just make it that.
Mm.
Yeah, as an homage to you, John. You know.
Yeah.
Because we're just such big fans.
Yeah. Super fans.
Super fans. That's right.
Super fans.
Yeah. Actually, Drew, you do have the hotline because you have my phone number. So,
Well, I don't need to use it for anything. It was just joking.
Oh,
I don't need to call you up and be like, oh, I'm gonna be late to the live stream. You're like, well, I'm not waiting for you.
Well, I wasn't going to wait for you guys. You're lucky I dialed you up when I did. I told you to be here at 3:30 today.
Well, for me, it was 6:30. So I mean, well,
yeah. So you're extra late.
Me and time zones. The time I interviewed you, I forgot time zones existed. So when we agreed on 7 or 4, we agreed on 4, and I was lucky that was the case because it was 7 for me, and you said like, oh, okay, 7 your time. I was gonna show up at 4 my time because I forgot time zones existed. So if I would have said 7 my time, I would have had to respectfully be up at 11 at night because I forgot.
It's actually 10, Drew.
What?
10, not 11. 10. It's a 3-hour difference.
Oh, well. You can understand how lucky I was that I chose 4 over 7.
I understand your confusion. Hey, Drew.
Didn't happen again.
Before I go to Paul for Trevor again for the last plugs, I do want to ask you a question. Were you nervous talking to me? Because you seemed really nervous.
Yes, I was sweating.
Okay.
Oh, that's such a self-flattering question,
That
John.
was the first time I ever interviewed anybody ever, and that was really the first interaction I had with somebody other than my immediate family since COVID started. So not only was I sweating, I didn't have lighting, so I took the shades off of incandescent lights and I just positioned them around my room, and I sat in front of a glass display box so there was flare. And, a lot's happened in the past 10 months because, first of all, I have a light and a microphone and a camera. None of those things I had before. So it's improving every day. So, yes, I was nervous.
I thought you were nervous. You seemed kind of nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time.
Back to right. And it was
though I remember, John, when you brought a very young me, I was like 14 or 15 years old, onto the TSG
audio
podcast.
Yep, I remember that.
Long ago. And I remember being nervous to get on your podcast. Like, wow, I get to be on TSG Multimedia. What an honor. And now I'm like, oh God, John's coming over. Now
that jerk is gonna be here. Yeah, maybe we should leave before he gets here.
Yeah. Lock the doors, everyone.
Yeah. Conveniently disappear, at the appointed time. Oh shoot! You invited him? Shit.
I don't think you give yourself enough credit.
Hey, that costs money, John.
Clint, do you still have your where you can make yourself beep?
Wait, what?
No, it's going to come out. I apologize to everybody now.
That one?
Do it.
Oh, there you go.
What are you talking about, Drew? What are you talking about?
How'd you do that?
What
money?
That?
I need one of those.
John, I'm in control of the stream even when it's not my stream. No, I'm just joking.
It's true, he is.
Or I could just self-mute myself like this. Oh, let's see if I can do it. Oh, that guy's coming? Oh.
It's not the same. You need something audible.
But you also need that little censored thing to appear over.
The bleep. You just gotta cover it.
Well, me and Clint are using M50s, and they do face tracking. So I look at my camera. There's a box around my face. So I wonder, somebody here can code. I'm sure
you got to turn it off, Drew,
to make a line, and then.
It's
possible. Yeah. We're going to make it happen. In the first place, this is going to be the one place where something has happened in model trains before it's happened anywhere else. Live stream face blurring.
Out of necessity.
Yeah, of course.
Definitely.
Right.
Although a lot of profanity occurs in model train podcasts all the time.
Yeah.
No, very frequently.
Very frequently.
I was thinking you were going to I thought you were going to say there's never been more profanities in a hobby other than model railroading, to which I could not agree more with.
Yeah, that might be true. Yeah.
You drop the one part you were holding on to, and it just disappears into your carpet, never to be seen.
You're ready to learn.
Oh my God, dude! Yeah, I feel that.
Do you know what's funny to me? Speaking of dropping stuff, I was working on these N-scale P42s recently, and you think, okay, I have it over the desk or table, whatever you're working on, no problem. And then you put it closer to see what you're actually taking apart, and it always falls. It always falls. Like I always let go of it at the worst time. And then you don't know, especially with N-scale, you don't know if it fell on your clothes, which it might stick to, or maybe it fell down into your shoe, or it hit the floor. Or you swear you heard it hit the floor, but you can't find it anywhere.
I have a term for that.
I found a Katie Cupler spring in the lint collector of my dryer. That was a really bad day for me.
I call it going to outer space. That's what
right.
happened.
It disappears before it.
Yeah,
black
Paul is the master of finding things that fall on the floor, though, aren't you, Paul?
Though. Yeah.
Well, I get down on the floor on my hands and knees with this thing and a light, and I'm just like, now where is it? I can't find it. It's crazy.
That's a good costume, John.
Oh, it is, isn't it? And then here's the dumb thing. You come back in days later, and it's in plain sight. I'm like, well, how did I miss that?
Yep.
Whatever it is. Of course, by then you've ordered a replacement part for $18 plus $20 for shipping or some other stupid.
Sounds like that happened.
I misplace SD cards a lot because I don't use an SD card. I use a micro SD card adapter, and so I misplace micro SD cards quite frequently.
Those are very easy to lose.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got off on a tangent. I don't know how that happened.
It took a half an hour.
Sounds like our podcast now.
Yeah, you're turning into me.
You guys were plugging stuff. Trevor and Paul was the last one. So we got Tree. Oh, I know. That's where we lost the track. It was on TFG Multimedia.
Yeah.
That's where we lost the track. So what else were you going to plug?
So we plugged Fern Creek and Western, right? Okay,
yes.
We plugged Fern Creek and Western. We plugged TFF, not TFG.
TFG Multimedia.
F.
Yeah.
Okay.
TFFG Multimedia.
All right, let's see. RWH Foundation
right.
who is trying to rebuild Climax construction number 1692, which is in Felton, California, next door to Roaring Camp. And that's rwhfoundation.com. You can sign up to either volunteer or donate. Again, as I say, we were trying to set up the facility for it first, but once that is started, then we'll actually get to start to rebuild the locomotive. So hopefully people will donate and start volunteering soon. We're going to put a fundraising campaign out. And then I work for two railroads, the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad, which is my part-time job when I'm up at college. That obviously didn't happen this year because of COVID, but they're ocsr.org. And then the main railroad I work for, which is Roaring Camp, we have two railroads, the Roaring Camp and Big Trees Narrow Gauge Steam Railroad, which is a 3-foot gauge railroad, and the Santa Cruz Big Trees and Pacific Railway, which is a standard gauge line that runs down from the mountains to the main beach in Santa Cruz next to the Boardwalk Amusement Park. You can find information about both of those railroads at roaringcamp.com. And there's also a Facebook and social media presence for them as well. John, you're muted.
You're muted, John.
I was still cussing. That's why. Thanks, Clint. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, I got you.
What I was going to say is also there's a really fun chasing trains video that we did up at Roaring Camp. Sometime was that in July? I don't remember. It was when the Hooter was put on the high stage. Was that July?
The Hooter whistle. Let's be specific here, okay?
Anyway, July, wasn't it?
It was October.
Oh, it was October? I thought it was earlier in the year.
No, it was October because the Heisler was down from May until October because it was down when the fire happened.
Oh, okay.
Ask me how I remember. I threw the truck under the thing in the engine house while the mountain was burning down. I remember
to put it out
very well.
Lot. Yeah.
That was a traumatic experience.
Right. What I was going to say is there's a great chasing trains episode where actually Paul and other Paul, his dad, were going up and down the mountains with me and Kevin and Kevin's dad, Curtis, and Trevor actually was working the trains that day. So there's some action shots of Trevor working his job as a fireman at Roaring Camp.
Yeah, if you want to see, if you want real profanity, throw two people on a steam locomotive that has a boiler coming between two of you, because the boiler on that thing goes all the way to the back of the cab almost. So you have to scream the profanity over the boiler. As
hope that the
and on that locomotive, there's your vocabulary is reduced down to about 5 words, all of which are 4 letters.
Okay, what about you, Paul? What about Paul's professional mixing service or mastering?
Oh, You know, just working on private projects right now with a buddy of mine, but you'll hear about that eventually. Nothing training
Okay.
related. Yeah.
Oh,
I'll send it
like
to you.
it's the next journey.
Right, we'll see.
Except for the fact that he's supposed to be making sounds for the Garden Railroad.
Oh,
Speaking of mixing.
Buildings for those, I will.
I could make
And programming my SD9.
I could
Yeah.
make this. This is
Here,
not
show
turning
them,
in-
show them, Paul. You have my engine.
Oh, you want me to show off your engine?
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I mean, that can't end it any better than that, right?
Just be like
Okay.
me and hit the outro button while people are talking.
I'm gonna do it. So
Okay, 3,
why
2,
don't I-
1.
Yeah, let me put you guys backstage again. Here, I'll make myself big first, so people have to look at me while I sign off, and then I'll
Uh-oh.
bring you guys back after the credits roll. All right. So, thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
We appreciate your time.
Great.
All right. So, if I can figure out how to do it here, why don't I just do it this easy way? Bye. Thanks, Sean. All right, so that's it for this episode of the TSG Live Crew Lounge. We don't have the topic chosen for next month yet, but I will be with you here Saturday next weekend with a podcast, and I will see you all then. So thanks for watching, and talk to you soon.